As I was watching the tape of the Las Vegas Raiders against the Miami Dolphins, one guy continued to flash over and over again, play in, play out. The guy was a dominant force, and this is a guy that was severely disrespected for weeks, honestly. Let's just be honest. Leading into probably like the 6th week of the season, Kolton Miller was disrespected by so many Raiders fans. People are like, get rid of this guy, trade him, right? Move him, maybe put Thayer Munford there, which made no sense to me. But people were like, get rid of Kolton Miller. The guy just doesn't look as good anymore. And over the past 6 games, Kolton Miller's been having a monster season. In fact, if you guys look at just some of the stats, over the first 4 games, Kolton Miller gave up 6 sacks. And in the last 6 games, he's given up no sacks. In fact, this guy's been ranked as one of the highest graded players by Pro Football Focus over the last 6 games. From a grade perspective, this guy's been phenomenal. And the tape definitely backs that up. And I think it's time that we recognize that Kolton Miller is slowly getting back to form. When I watch tape with certain guys, you can just tell if a guy's smart or if a guy understands football, if a guy actually knows what he's doing out there. Or you can watch guys and say, okay, that guy's clearly being overwhelmed. He's not ready for the NFL. With Kolton Miller, this guy's so smart. There was a play against the Dolphins. In fact, it was the Brock Bowers touchdown against the Dolphins. Kolton Miller not only engaged with the defensive tackle, but a guy came off the edge and he let go of that defensive tackle. And then he got to that corner and made sure that corner didn't have a free shot at the quarterback. That's a smart-ass play, right? You can just tell that those are the type of plays that a guy that understands football, a guy that's ready for that speed and nothing overwhelms him, that is the type of player you want on your football team. And I think Kolton Miller is once again getting to the point where we can start saying this guy's a top 15 offensive tackle in the NFL. And we can also get to the point where we can say this guy, relative to the cap dollars, is a very, very, very good value for the Raiders. Kolton Miller, to me, has been really, really good. And just the tape I watch of this guy, he's really getting back to form. And what's interesting about Miller is, we don't expect Kolton Miller to be 100% this season, right? In fact, although the guy's been playing really good, I think he's going to be better next year, right? In a year where he can go into the offseason, he can work out, he can put the effort in, and then he can essentially come back fully healthy, had a really, really good offseason, and then come into a season, which in this instance will then be the 2025 NFL season. And I think there's a chance Kolton Miller ends up having his best season at that point. When you're an offensive tackle like Kolton Miller, where you're very raw coming in, Miller gave up like 16 sacks his rookie year. When you're that type of offensive tackle and you come into the NFL and you struggle over the first 2 years, usually you're not going to become an all-pro caliber guy until probably like your 7th or 8th season. And that's kind of where Kolton Miller's at this point. Kolton Miller this year is in year 7. So this is probably the year he would have hit that prime and been at the top of his game. But unfortunately, he had the shoulder issue. But I think next year there's a real chance Kolton Miller ends up becoming probably a top 7 to 8 offensive tackle, overall offensive tackle. And I say that not that he's, he might not be that. I'm talking about generally speaking what, the general fan kind of thinks out there. I think Kolton Miller is going to be able to kind of hit that over the next couple of years. And I'm happy that the Raiders did not trade this guy away because we have a cornerstone at that left tackle position. Miller right now is 29 years old. He can probably play at a really high level for the next 4 to 5 years. I think as an offensive tackle, you can generally play until you're like 33, 34, 35 years old. So we should have a lot of good years from Miller as we go forward. On top of that, if the Raiders actually go out and draft a quarterback in this offseason, that's going to allow the Raiders to have a left tackle, right? Have a franchise left tackle protecting that quarterback, which is going to make it so much easier for that young quarterback. So I'm happy that the Raiders did not trade him away. Lastly, I think as an offensive line, the Raiders are starting to build towards that offensive line that could be a really good offensive line. Jackson Powers-Johnson, I think at this point, is going to be the Raiders starting center going forward. I don't see that actually changing. Now, you got Kolton Miller at left tackle, and those two guys are 100% locked in for the future. That's not going to change for the next 5 years. At right tackle, DJ Glaze can prove himself, but I'm not the type of person to watch 4 games and say this guy's a superstar player. Right, especially on the offensive line, I need guys to really prove it. Right, I need guys to actually show it. And there are guys like Jackson Powers-Johnson that show it right away, but there are other guys that don't. Right, they got to develop into that. Kolton Miller was a good example of a guy that had to develop into it. DJ Glaze is also another guy that has to develop into it, and we'll see what he kind of looks like at the end of the season. And we'll also see how he looks, after a good offseason and then coming into year 2. But the guard positions for the Raiders really worry me at this point, and I think those are the 2 positions we got to fix before next season starts. the Raiders can go out and draft a quarterback, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But you got to make sure the offensive line up front is able to bully people, right? You don't want an offensive line that's consistently being pushed back into the quarterback. Believe it or not, a quarterback's confidence gets impacted depending on how good that offensive line is or not. We've seen guys like Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell struggle for the Raiders, right? Multiple games this year. Aiden O'Connell last year with the offensive line struggling. And I think as the Raiders go forward, you got to get those two guards. I think you can probably draft one. Truth be told, there's so many good guards coming out in this class. You can honestly draft two if you really wanted to, but you don't want two rookies starting next year. So I think you draft one, and then you probably go out and bring one in via free agency. Dylan Parham, I think I've seen enough that I don't think he's the future for the Raiders. Jordan Meredith, he's good, but I would rather have those two guys specifically be backup caliber guys that come in, and if you really need them, they can rotate in, they can play multiple positions. Dylan Parham oftentimes is being pushed back and he is being bullied, right? And to me, you can have him start and that's great, but you always know that there's an upgrade out there, right? If you want to bring in a true bully, right, a Richie Incognito at guard, if you want to bring in a guy like Damian Lewis or Robert Hunt, if you want to bring in a guy like Joe Tooney or Trey Smith, right? If you really want to be an absolute bully up front, you got to bring in guys that have that upside. Dylan Parham does not, right? So to me, there's always going to be a guy that's going to beat up on Dylan Parham. It might be that playoff game. It might be that Super Bowl game. The Raiders got to figure out those guard positions. I do think the offensive line's in a really, really good spot, and Kolton Miller is obviously a big part of that. So shout out to Kolton Miller. The Raiders also do have a game coming up, and although I know a lot of people aren't going to be talking about this game, especially since so many people are ready to tank, we got a game coming up against Denver Broncos. And I think it's an interesting game because the Raiders are at this point in the season where our team is absolutely banged up. I mean, Malcolm Koonce is out. Christian Wilkins is out. Nate Hobbs has been out for multiple games at this point as well. And based off the report, he's probably not going to play once again this week. Antonio Pierce told us that running back Alexander Madison's not going to practice. Zamir White is not going to practice. Jack Jones is not practicing. Nate Hobbs is not practicing. Jacorian Bennett is not practicing. I mean, that's crazy. We literally don't have our two starting running backs and any of the three starting corners. So, what are the Raiders going to do at this point, right? Obviously, the Cam Richardson has been getting a look out there, and I'm glad that we're able to kind of throw him out there in a season that really doesn't matter a whole lot from this point forward. I think it's good to be able to get some of those younger guys out there, even at the running back position. Amir Abdullah might end up getting the start against the Broncos, but I want to see Dylan Labe play a little bit. And Antonio Pierce talked about him a little bit, right? He said he's been doing all the right things. He's been coming in. He's been doing his thing. He's been working. He's been putting the effort in. But I want to see that actually translate. I don't want to just hear those words. I want to see it actually translate to the football field. So I hope the Raiders actually give this guy 10 or 15 touches in this upcoming game. Let's see what we have with this kid. Maybe he makes a play here or there. I know some people have talked about how he's come in, and I think his last two touches have both essentially been fumbles. Fumbling's one thing, right? But if you're a playmaker and you can make plays, you want to get that guy out on the football field. And we don't know if Labe can make plays or not. We do know he fumbles. Fumbles you can kind of coach out of and kind of grow out of those things. But is he explosive or not? Because you can't teach explosiveness. You can't teach vision. You can't teach some of those things. So I want to find out if Labe actually has it, and hopefully we find out in this game. But we are super, super banged up, right? You see all these players that are banged up. That doesn't include guys on the offensive side that we no longer had that we had at the beginning of the year. Our tackle positions, our guard position, everything's changed for the Raiders. Our ex-receiver coming into the season with Devontae is no longer here, right? So things are just so different for the Raiders, but I do want to see how we can kind of finish this season. I understand to tank the rest of the season makes sense for the draft aspect of it, but we also got to recognize that, do we have our head coach of the future? Do we have our offensive coordinator of the future? Do we have our, backup quarterback of the future, right? If you get a rookie quarterback, are you comfortable throwing this guy out there and saying, go make it happen? Or, do you bring him on slowly? The way the New England Patriots did with Drake May, and it's kind of worked out because Drake May looks like the best quarterback in this class up to this point. Do you want to bring him slowly like the way we've seen Jordan Love come on and Aaron Rodgers come on as well? Right? Or do you want to just throw him in there like Bryce Young and like Anthony Richardson and some of these other quarterbacks that haven't worked out up to this point, right? So I just think it's interesting. We'll see what ends up happening. But I do want to talk about one final thing. Obviously, you guys see the title. Shedeur Sanders, Coach Prime. a guy who I respect a ton, and I think Coach Prime's one of the best. He's one of the best coaches and just celebrity figures out there in that world, in my opinion, because this guy not only tells it how it is, but this guy actually demands respect from his players, and people respect it. I know there's a lot of news stories that kind of trend with Coach Prime, and people, are very, very turned off by kind of some of the stuff that kind of comes out. But if you guys follow Colorado, and I actually do follow Colorado, they're one of probably like the 5 teams that I follow in the world of football. Colorado's done a really good job, specifically with Coach Prime. He's built his way up slowly and slowly and slowly. Every program he's been to, right? He coached high school. He went to Jackson State. Now he's at Colorado. He's always only won, right? And I think Coach Prime deserves credit for that. But Coach Prime was on the Ice Cube podcast, right? And on that podcast, there were some interesting words that were kind of said. And I just want you guys to listen in, and I want to talk about this on the other side.
What would you do? You in my situation.
Help them get to the next level
Okay,
any way I can.
I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
But should it go past that, or?
What do you mean past that?
Let him go to the NFL, continue to coach his son.
Hey, come on now. Why not? Especially if it's in a Raider uniform. Come on, baby. Oh, man, don't get me to acting a fool. You know what I mean? That would be a dream come true as a fan of the Raiders, or as the president of the Raider Nation. You know what I mean? I do approve this message.
So should Coach Prime continue to go into the NFL and essentially coach his son? Coach Prime is kind of throwing that out there himself, right? It's not like Ice Cube or someone else specifically asked. Coach Prime is putting that information out there himself. And I think it's kind of interesting because he has stated that he plans to stay with Colorado, right? He stated that he plans to stay within the Colorado Buffaloes, and he doesn't expect to go anywhere. He doesn't expect to follow his son. But the rumors have been everywhere. They've started. People have talked about it. And of course, Ice Cube, representing the Raider Nation, has obviously put it out there that he would love for Coach Prime to come to the Raiders. Now, obviously, the Raiders have a coach in Antonio Pierce. I think it's wishful thinking to say that, hey, let's get both Shedeur Sanders and Deion Sanders. Plus, we don't really know if it's going to actually work out. College is a lot different than NFL, even as a coach. And I think Coach Sanders is going to be much better as a college coach, especially right now, than saying, hey, my son's about to get drafted to, the Raiders or the Cowboys. And I want to also kind of make my way over there, and I want to go ahead and coach that team as well. I don't think that would be smart for Coach Sanders. But it's interesting however you look at it, right? Because Deion Sanders has won wherever he's went, right? He's built up programs. He's done a good job. He's gotten the culture right. And it's just interesting however you look at it, right? Now, of course, one of the things we have realized with Antonio Pierce is, Antonio Pierce is only going to be as good as his offensive coordinator, right? Luke Getsy sucked. Our season sucked. Straight up. It is what it is. Coach Prime also does not call offensive plays. So Colorado has Pat Shurmur hired as their offensive coordinator. And Shurmur's done a really good job for Colorado compared to last year to this year. Their offense is a lot better. And they're also winning more games because of it. So, Deion Sanders, if he came into the NFL, whichever team it was, he'd have to obviously make sure his offensive coordinator is on point. But I don't think it makes sense for the Raiders to go down that path. There is also another thing that has kind of came out earlier today. If you guys did not see it, I made a whole video on this earlier this morning. But Shedeur Sanders essentially accepted an invite to the East-West Shrine Bowl as opposed to the Senior Bowl. And some people are kind of shocked to see that this is what ultimately happened. I find it interesting that he essentially is going to the Shrine Bowl. I don't want to get too much into it, right? Because I talked about it on my other channel. If you guys want to check that video out, I'll link it down in the comments below. But I just want to kind of wrap this video up saying this. Every Raider fan that I see on social media is always talking about Shedeur Sanders, right? Everybody's like, bring that guy in. He's our next quarterback. Mark him down for the Raiders' next quarterback. I hope people recognize that we're at the point in the year still where we have 6 months left until the actual NFL season, or until the actual NFL draft, right? 6 months, long time away. A lot can change from this point to that point, and a lot will change, right? But we got to recognize that we're so early on in the process that it's not guaranteed Shedeur Sanders is even going to be a first-round pick, right? I'm not saying he won't be. To me, right now, right after Cam Moore, Shedeur Sanders is my second quarterback on the board. I do like guys like Jalen Milroe a lot, but I wouldn't go to the point to say I would take him over Shedeur Sanders. But I also recognize that things are going to change, and NFL teams are not putting their rankings out there. NFL scouts are not leaking them, right? Like those people are not in the business of putting their opinions out. The people that are in the business of putting their opinion out are guys like Mel Kiper, right? It's guys that are working for The Athletic. It's guys that work for ESPN and NFL Network and CBS Sports. They're draft analysts. They're not people within the NFL building. So, although a lot of people that are saying Shedeur Sanders is the best quarterback, he's the number one overall pick, you got to recognize NFL teams might not actually agree with that. Right? There were multiple examples over the years where people are like, hey, quarterback X and Y is the best quarterback in this class, and it's not close. And, maybe it's this quarterback and it's not close. And then that quarterback ends up being a second, third round pick. We've seen it happen multiple times. Will Levis is a good example of that recently. Jalen, I forget his name, but the quarterback that played for Tennessee, I think he ended up with the Patriots last year. He was another example of that. People were like, hey, I will take this guy in the top of the second round, right? Instead of taking a quarterback in the first, take this guy in the top of the second round. He ended up being like a 7th round pick, right? So to me, I think we're so early on in the process, we don't know which quarterback is actually QB1, right? But from what I'm hearing, Cam Ward's the quarterback that right now is at the highest. And then some people do think Shedeur Sanders is still going to be a top 10 pick, but he may not have a first round grade, right? So we'll see what actually ends up happening, but never say never with which quarterback the Raiders are going to end up getting. Also, if the Raiders win even one game going forward, we have like the 11th overall pick. We're not getting any of these quarterbacks at that point, right? So it's just something to kind of keep an eye on. Every team right now has 2 or 3 wins. I think that gets you like the top 13, 14 teams. So you win one game, you're dropping down to like 8 or 9. You win 2 games, you're picking out like pick 15, right? So it's just something to kind of keep an eye. Always be open to the fact that the Raiders might not actually draft a quarterback in this class. There's a real chance that the Raiders might say, hey, let's draft Ashton Genty or Travis Hunter. Let's draft one of these guys as a difference maker. And we can come back in the following year and then target a rookie quarterback potentially. Right? The Steelers went with that, and they're in the playoffs. The Vikings, although they did draft the rookie quarterback, also took Sam Darnold. And Sam Darnold's kind of clicked, and he's kind of figured things out a little bit. The Buccaneers went from Brady to Baker Mayfield, and they're still in the playoffs. At least they were last year. They'll probably make it again this year. So there's just a lot that could happen, right? I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Obviously, I wanted to kind of put some things out there. There's not a lot of things coming out with the Raiders at this point. It does suck to only have 2 wins, and essentially your season's over, and we still have like 7-8 weeks of football left. It sucks. It really, really does suck, but it is what it is. We'll continue covering the Raiders. Hope you guys all have a great day, and I'll see you guys next time with another video.